Alright, today we're talking about Bill Steer. This guy almost single-handedly created 3 of metal's most famous genres. So why do you never hear his name mentioned among the greatest to ever do it? There are plenty of other metal guitarists who aren't nearly as good or impactful, and they get way more credit than Bill. And today I'm gonna dive into exactly why Bill Steer is so underrated, the music he helped create, and the guitarist he should be in front of. And there are some popular names on that list. By the way, I'm Kane Irvine, this is the heaviest show in the universe, and I am a former metal elitist basement dweller and lifelong metalhead. Metal is all I do, all the time. I live for it. Let's dive in. Death metal indeed has a rich history. Some of the greatest guitar players of all time reside within this genre. But a lot of these guys, while great, didn't necessarily create what Bill Steer helped create. And I'll get to that in a sec. But first, I want to paint a picture of the guitarists that get placed above Bill Steer in all of the all-time greatest guitarist combos. This will truly help you see the impact he has and why he's so underrated, which I'll clear up more near the end of the video. So first, let's take a look at Guitar World's top 100 metal guitarists of all time list. We have Bill Steer at number 92, below names like his future bandmate, Michael Amott, John Schaefer, number 83, Trey Azagthoth, number 55, Mick Mars, number 46, Ace and Paul from Kiss, number 14, Mantis from Venom, number 39, and the list goes on and on. This list, it's kind of a joke, but even in the comments, there's not a lot of people yelling about Bill Steer being at number 92. All of those other guys I mentioned are basically household names within metal. Bill never really gets the recognition he deserves. A lot of those guys mentioned are great players, but they didn't help create what Bill created. The influence that someone like Bill Steer has without the recognition that some of these other guys have, it's insane. I'm gonna reveal some intense obscure metal lore right here. 3 huge genres of metal owe credit to Bill Steer's massive influence. One of those being Grindcore. And I'll get to the other 2 in a minute. Let's take a quick step back here to 1987. While death metal was being shaped in North America, the British were forming something similar, Grindcore. It's often said that Napalm Death are the first Grindcore band, and it's nearly impossible to disagree with this. Grindcore has a pretty in-depth history that I'm not gonna go into fully right here. If y'all want a video on Grindcore, comment down below, I'll make it. And Napalm Death had some history before 1987, but they truly took off and created Grindcore with their album Scum in 1987. And on the B-side of that album was 16-year-old guitarist Bill Steer. This album laid the groundwork for what Grindcore would become. Listening to the B-side of that album, it's different than the A-side. The B-side being tracks 13 to 28, go check it out. There's more emphasis on the riff, the groove, and even a little bit of melody. Now, melody and groove aren't Grindcore's forte per se, but this signals something very important for later on, because I believe that the riffing on that B-side was in fact due to Bill Steer's influence. But he also played on Napalm Death's second record in 1988. But Napalm Death was like Bill's side project, because at the same time, he was writing similar, intense, D-beat type music mixed with metal in his band Carcass. Their first 2 albums, Reek of Putrefaction and Symphonies of Sickness, are just as, if not more, impactful than Scum and From Enslavement to Obliteration. These are Grindcore masterpieces. When we listen to these albums, we truly experience the importance of Bill Steer to Grindcore. Between his contributions on the first 2 Napalm Death and Carcass records, it's pretty easy to say that Bill Steer is one of, if not the true father of Grindcore. But that's not it. You've already seen the impact he had creating one of the most infamous genres of metal. Here's an important detail that sheds a lot of light on how Bill would write his music. Bill was one of the UK's first tape traders. You know those guys over in the US that were LARPing as the Pirate Bay back in the 1980s? Anyway, Bill was really feeding the growth of extreme metal in the UK. Think of it like this. He took those early tapes from the American death metal bands and fused it with the hardcore punk influences he was hearing while touring and recording with Napalm Death. This directly inspired how Napalm Death and Carcass would sound, and Carcass's second and third albums would show this. While Symphonies of Sickness had some Grindcore on it, Necroticism is an absolute pure death metal ripper and masterpiece. But both of these albums are landmark, epic, all-time metal releases. Every track on both of these albums has all-time metal riffs. These 2 albums might have the most consistent assembly of 10 out of 10 riffs ever recorded. And these are 99% Bill Steer's twisted brainchild. Whenever I listen to these 2 albums, I'm blown away by what I hear, because I hear just about every part of this awesome modern death metal scene we have in these songs. Listening to Undeath, Venom Prison, Hath, The Black Dahlia Murder, and I can hear that early Carcass sound so deeply in the music. These two albums were written at a time when death metal was still forming. Carcass firmly planted themselves as crazy influential in the scene. Their sound was so unique compared to Obituary or even Morbid Angel, with that hint of grindcore slime and sludge that came from hardcore punk really driving them forward. But there was something else that Carcass had that the American bands didn't have, and that was that hint of groove, melody, hooks that you heard in Carcass that you didn't really hear in American death metal. The tempos would change during the choruses, and they would come in and out of these bridges with blast beats and hooky grooves and melodies. Take a listen to Obituary's Slowly We Rot or Deicide's first few albums next to Symphonies or Necroticism. You'll hear a lot more emphasis on quick turn groove, precise riffing, and even a melody or hook to keep you in the track. This isn't a coincidence. I believe this direct influence of more punk in the UK instead of thrash bands like Slayer really affected Bill Steer's writing style. I love Symphonies and Necroticism. These are two of the greatest death metal albums ever released, but I promised 3 genres of metal that Bill Steer helped create. Earlier, I mentioned the B-side of Scum and how different the riffing and structure was compared to the A-side, and how I believe Bill Steer influenced that, and then went on to create very unique death metal in Carcass, relying on groove, melody, and hookier choruses, like the track Exhumed to Consume off of Symphonies of Sickness. Bill's unique approach to writing would culminate in one of metal's greatest pieces, 1993's Heartwork, arguably the first mellow death album, even before the Swedes popularized it. Bill Steer's unique writing really came into its own here, creating the blueprint for melodic death metal and therefore influencing a lot of the later new wave of American heavy metal and the melodic metalcore scene. Bands like Killswitch, Trivium, Shadows Fall, they owe so much to Heartwork, and therefore Bill Steer. Bands like Trivium and Evil have directly stated the impact that Heartwork had on their music. And Michael Amott, the lead guitarist on Heartwork, deserves credit here, but more on him later. So Bill has his fingerprints littered all throughout metal's history. So why is it he often doesn't get the recognition that he deserves? Well, you see, death metal really is an American movement at its core. So when you're in the UK, which was more focused on punk or even grindcore at the time, your influence might just slide under the radar a bit, even when it comes to melodic death metal. That was far more important in the latter half of the 90s, being heavily pioneered by the Swedes. And they usually get a lot more credit for pioneering that sound, which is fine, but Heartwork really is the first mellow death album. Again, it's just coming from the UK, not exactly an extreme metal stronghold. Once the new wave of British heavy metal moved overseas and became thrash, the UK itself wasn't really involved in the advancement of extreme metal from then on. It moved mostly to America and then the Nordic countries to become more extreme. I think Bill Steer's influence, while not as overt as the guys I mentioned earlier, is more noticeable than one might actually think. Treya Zagthoth of Morbid Angel even credited Carcass as an influence for Altars of Madness. That's about as influential on death metal as you can get. Bill Steer is more influential and overall a better player than Trey. Trey is important to death metal, but I don't think he helped create entire subgenres like Bill did. Even his bandmate, Michael Amott, gets more credit than he does. He's definitely more popular, despite not writing nearly as much of Carcass's material, and only being on 2 Carcass albums. And I think this is due to his playing in Arch Enemy. Arch Enemy really took the sound of Heartwork and rose to fame on the back of it. They really do sound like a Heartwork era ripoff. I could go on and on about how Bill Steer deserves to be above X or Y player, but really, I just think he's top 5 in death metal and top 15 all time for all other metal. And I don't want to discount the early members of Carcass either. Jeff Walker and drummer Ken Owen are huge in all of this as well. But really, Bill was the driving force and only consistent member through their whole tenure. So, what do you think? Where does Bill Steer place all time for you? Is he above Trey from Morbid Angel? Is he above guys like Pat O'Brien or Chuck Schuldiner? In the end, Bill Steer created some of metal's most important music. Do you think he gets enough credit? Thank you so much for watching. Check out some of these other bangers here, and of course, as always, long live metal.